Hello, welcome to the Alien Rabbit channel, and this is going to be a video where I talk about my book Suicide by Computation, of which I've got a second edition version of here, and I'll be, if you are new to this channel, by the way, like and subscribe. We're an independent book publisher based in the UK. We're publishing books, art prints, with a focus on currently the focus of the books is, well, we're going to do a bit of poetry but also fiction, and yeah, we'll see. It's early days, but yeah. Anyway, without further ado, I'm not going to ramble for too long. That's the preliminary sort of bits out of the way. So yeah, Suicide by Computation. This is a book I wrote. I finished it last year, and the whole process of writing it took probably 4 years actually. But I know most of the writing was done while still staying in Moscow. But anyway, I don't want to retread old ground too much. But if you've not seen any other videos about Suicide by Computation, that's what it is. So in this video, I'm just going to talk about every story individually and give some thoughts about each. So first off, spoiler warning, there will be spoilers. So just your first warning, I recommend that you do not watch this video if you've not read the book, because otherwise I will only spoil the story. We're going to talk about the ideas, where the ideas came from, what idea I was trying to get across with each story, as well as just like background information on, why each story was written, I guess. You can pick it up on Amazon, by the way, so if you've not already read it, again, final spoiler warning now. Pick it up on Amazon, search Suicide by Computation or alienrabbit.co.uk. And we're 2 minutes in. So let's begin. So I'll just read out the preface as well, just shortly. Compilation of short stories I wrote over a number of years, going back to 2018. Yeah, that's more like the background. Okay, so with this book I wanted to explore the bizarre, the absurd and the strange in a science fiction setting, as well as creating a text that makes the reader contemplate the barriers between the real and the simulated, between our highest ideals and the harshest realities of life. Now, there was definitely a pessimism in the spirit, I'd say, which was with me in some ways when I wrote this book. I even included a quote at the start, in the second edition anyway, from Philip Mainlander, who was a philosopher, German nihilist pessimist philosopher, who sadly took his own life after he released his first book. He released his first, I think it was De Philosophie de Erlösung, and which is a book, philosophical text, and then a lot of it dealt with the idea of the universe being made by a god that kills itself. Right, so it's quite depressing, and it's quite ironic in a way that he actually. Oh, sorry. I should have warned that there will be mention of obviously that, death, adult themes, horror themes, etc, etc. Sorry, I should have mentioned that before. I apologise. There will obviously be like triggering content, as it were. But yeah. Anyway, table of contents. So let's go into the first story. So, Carol who deals in boxes. So what can I say about the story? Essentially, this is. It's many things actually. This is one of the first sort of short stories. When I started getting into like doing short story writing, this is one of the first, if not the first actually, really short. This would have been actually finished. It was the earliest of all the stories. It's the starting point, I think, for all the stories in the book. It concerns a Sid who's like a technician. There's basically these guys who try and fix people's brains who've become locked into sort of brain freezing, comatose state through overuse of technology, basically. So it's a lot of themes of addiction to technology and how we escape through our technology and how it can make us ill, but also the delusional as well. So the character Carol, mentioned in the title, is a sort of technician slash hacker sort of character, but she's been so addicted to the cybercube that she's become comatose, basically. So she's still alive, but brain is functioning still, but she's basically comatose, frozen, like a Nick Homer, basically. And this character Sid is being sent into her mind, a bit like in The Cube, if you know that film, to try and extract herself, basically, into awareness again. But in the process, something goes wrong. There's an energy spike, and his body gets just basically obliterated. So he goes into a sort of oblivion. Now, oblivion is a theme in this book. Like I had. That's been mentioned, like that. I mean, which makes sense given the title, right? But yeah, oblivion is quite a theme. So anyway, so it's sort of an allegory, so on some level. Like one could say that there's obviously the body swap theme. So because Sid is a guy and Carol's a woman, and that was in mind when I was doing it. I wanted to probe into some idea of what it must be like to be a woman who's also a genius, because the character in this book is a genius, but also the slightly crazy type, to be honest, of genius. So she's burning bright. It goes into that a lot as well, in the scenes where he basically revisits her memories and yada yada yada. Yeah, I guess that'll do for that one. I'm pretty happy with it overall. I think I achieved something quite interesting with the story. I'll leave it at that. I don't want to make these sort of wrapping ups too long. You know what I mean? Okay, move on to the second story now. The Oppenheimer Blues. So this was really fun to write. This is like sort of the first story I started writing where I was threading in historical events and figures, actually, to be honest. So if you read the Oppenheimer Blues, which again, final spoiler warning now, the Oppenheimer Blues concerns, starts off with Oppenheimer, the inventor of the atomic bomb, it's the Manhattan Project, and it's basically the story of the premise of this entire story is that history is a cycle that repeats itself, and even when we completely destroy ourselves as the human race, something will emerge out of that, like cockroaches in this case, and then these cockroaches will, repopulate the earth and do the exact same thing again. So it's extreme pessimism in a lot of ways. It's like we're doomed to repeat the same cycles, even if we're human beings or if we're cockroach human beings. There's a bit of dark humour in this story as well, for sure, but it's obviously because it's like, the midway point after Stanislav Petrov is also mentioned in this story as well, who's a great he was an everyday hero, really. If you're not looking at the history of Stanislav Petrov, he averted the nuclear exchange in the Soviet Union during the 1980s. So yeah, it was interesting to do some research on him. I don't even know how I remembered. I found out about it. I think I just saw a documentary about him called "The Man Who Saved the World." That's fascinating, and essentially it's like a divergence tale. Sort of what if he hadn't made the right choice on that fateful night, and we had ended up getting destroyed, and then we all turned into cockroaches. So there's a certain absurdism there. Obviously, a bit of a Kafka influence with the metamorphosis, which is fairly obvious, I guess. But yeah, I think I'll do for that. I was fairly happy with that story. I think the next one is Curse the Cosmonaut. This is one of the first more like traditional horror fictions I wanted to write, short stories. So it's about a character I can dive on. It's a Russian character in this one specifically, not all of them are, but this is a Russian character set in a Russian context, and I just wanted to do a vampire story in space, alright? I just wanted to do a vampire story. I also did this through an event as well, but yeah, I really just wanted to explore. The clever part of this story is the fact that the vampire at the start, who we don't know who that is exactly, turns out to be the main character, and he's cursed to a really horrible fate, which is to be a vampire you cannot feed in a sort of degenerated vampire form, lost in space, floating above, without any chance of escape or getting back down to Earth. So extremely pessimistic. I couldn't say much more about it really. It's a unconventional vampire story. I wanted to subvert some tropes, right? It's mixing in science fiction themes with horror as well, of course. But yeah, I'm actually pretty happy with it overall. It's a bit snappy. It's like basically takes like 5 pages. This is a bit more of a spiritual story now. This is the castle that breathed, and in a way, this is a spiritual story. This is actually a story about love, actually. Maybe possibly the first love story I've ever wrote, really, in terms of these short story collections, anyway. And it's a tragic love story that also ends in an oblivion again. But it is a love story, and it is a love story between a systems developer and an artificial intelligence in a castle in Scotland. So yeah, I mean, if you read it, you understand that basically it's about an artificial intelligence learning what love is and care, basically, and empathy. Because there's a theme that goes on a few times in this book. The nuclear exchange happens, but Max, I think it's Max, isn't it? Who is? Let me just double check. Anyway, yeah, is basically trapped inside this castle, which is protected to some degree. It's like an intelligent housing, so it's like an advanced. It's like a sort of showroom, essentially. If you look at a show house, it's going to be a show house, but basically he's having to maintain it, do some work on the computer systems, because it's still the idea is this artificial intelligence looks after this house, basically. But then the worst happens outside, but there is some protective shielding from the radiation that's obviously poisoned the earth because there's been a nuclear exchange, right? And yeah, it's just a sad story. I want to tell a story of a lonely man who's already on his own doing this shift. The grief he goes through, the grieving process. Really, primarily, it's a story about the grieving process. Really, to be honest, that is what this story is about. It's about the grieving process. It's knowing that everybody in the world is dead. You are gonna die, and there's nothing you can do about it. And then teaching an artificial intelligence how to love and what love is, and basically, like I say in the story, swapping mixtapes with an artificial intelligence called Alice, you know. Although Alice is obviously an allusion to the Red Queen, is obviously an allusion to Alice in Wonderland, which I should have said earlier, but which is fairly obvious. And then I put in the line about not with a bang but a whimper. Just had to put in a bit of T.S. Eliot. And yeah, it's quite a sad ending. It's sweet in one way, but also very sad. It's a sad story to write, that, actually. Okay, next story. The Oddballs will inherit the Earth. Now, this is the longest story in the collection. It's fairly long. It's ambitious in some level. It's not that ambitious. It's pretty much just an average length short story, but it's basically that. But what can I say about this story? So there's a lot that goes on in this story. Oddballs will inherit the Earth. It's a battle with it's the Gonzo journalist story I mentioned before, obviously. If you read it, obviously you're going to know that. This was quite ambitious because this is like the first story I wrote where I was like, okay, let's just try and push things a bit further. Like, we're going to have 3 different time zones. We're going to have a grander narrative. It's also one of the first stories I started though as well. It's like, funnily enough, this is the story I started just after Carol and June Deals and Boxes. But I wanted to be more ambitious. So there's 3 different time zones, and yeah, like there's quite a few different characters, and there's complex weaving narratives basically between the 3 time zones. So the time zones, there's one which is the present, or actually no, there's the past, the present, and the future. Those are the 3 time zones. The past is the world in which the main character Oddball, or otherwise known as Oscar, but he refers to himself as Oddball constantly. He's a Gonzo style journalist, sort of freewheeling freelance journalist, bit of a drunk, sort of degenerate in some terms ways, and he basically does this bombing near his house that wakes him up. So, true story, one thing that actually inspired this was actually a real world terrible event that happened to me. I lived in Manchester. Or not happened to me, but an experience I lived through basically. So I lived in Manchester while the Rio Grande bombing happened, which is when I started writing the story actually, not long after. And it was a terrible event, but it sort of made me think about, just gave me that initial idea of, because I was in Manchester when all that happened, and it was a scary time. Like, there was helicopters going off everywhere, sirens and everything. My friends had friends who were nearby where it happened and everything. And obviously the actual event itself was terrible, but anyway, I don't want to go off on that. And yeah, so this bombing happens. The journalist does some investigative journalism. There's the present, which is the robot world. Oh, yeah. There's 2 time zones, sorry. I made a mistake there. There's 2 time zones. There's 2, not 3. Yeah, sorry. That was my bad. There's 2 time zones. There is the past and the present, basically. So, yeah, sorry, that was my mistake. Just because it's a bit confusing, because basically it seems at the start like there are, anyway, I don't want to over-explain this. Basically, I'm pretty happy with it. Like, I don't know what else I can say about it really. So, I mean, obviously it deals with the question of artificial intelligence and, how much power do we give that? I had the quite absurd idea of, what if we just take all of Facebook or a website like that basically, and just use that to say this is what human beings are. It's like if you gave an AI, you want to teach an AI what being human is, they're not going to have a great time completely. I mean, there's good aspects to humanity, but there's very dark aspects as well, which is basically the idea I was trying to get across in this story. The hubris of man, if you will, the hubris of man to presume that he can invent a new life and not just repeat the same old issues and problems that humanity has always had, because we can't escape human nature. And if you're trying to make machines like human beings, well, what, you just want to program in the same flaws? I have honestly a bit of a chip on my shoulder about all this stuff now. AI development. It's like, why do we want robots to be like human beings? Why do we want that? Really? Like, let's program in the same flaws. I mean, I'm not against AI. I'm not a Luddite or anything, but I just think, what are we gonna do? Why make them like us? It's pointless. If you want to, if you want to make robots that have useful functions, but Anyway, don't go off on. The Abyss of Gringor, the Datachild. Now this is in fact the oldest story, though I had finished it off towards when I was editing the book. It's the oldest story in the entire book. Most of it's considered a simulation, and basically I'm asking, well, if you can get everything on tap and you can basically be a being that lives in basic paradise, what if you had a chaotic thought like, well, I live in paradise, but what if I didn't? That was basically the idea of this story. It's the data children, sort of like this idea of God alien beings that travel through space and just Genesis machines and make. And but I started working on this actually like in my 20s, like a long time ago, and then I eventually refound it again somehow. It's actually quite lucky because I thought I'd lost it forever, and then I somehow managed to recover the file. So, and then there's a lot of editing to it, obviously, and added to it and finished it off. But I was glad I found it eventually. I think I found it on my Gmail account or something like that. Anyway, but yeah, and obviously it's quite interesting in the sense of like, you know, living information beings, sort of an idea I got from Philip K. Dick and the idea of Alice and everything. So okay, we're on to the next story actually because it's already my normal bit. The Wandering God, bit of a quite bizarre story. Basically about, again, a similar theme, so you thought it related to the last story because it's basically a being that's a sort of God that's just seen everything. Imagine being God, right? So you are God. You know everything. You know all. You get bored. I've said this all my entire life. If you know everything, if you know the fate of everything, if you know that how everything ends, how everything begins, what everything is going to happen, you go mad. And this is about a character, Morpheus in this example, who basically flies, he's a multi-dimensional being, and he visits the Godhead Dictoriate, which is basically an abstract representation of a sort of insane God machine. And it's just a description of that. It's a very unusual story. I'm quite happy with it because it's basically, it conjures up a lot of weird imagery from it, which is I like in stories. So I think it pretty happy with it in that sense. Anthill Revolutionary. So again, like I said, a lot of these stories are pessimistic. Basically, two stoners having a stone conversation about can we get socialism to work with bra. That's basically this story in a nutshell. So it's a sort of comedic tale. It's a bit of light relief from a lot of the bleaker stuff. There's still intelligent things in there. There's obviously dream as well. There's a part where the character has a dream about death itself and like how. So I wanted to basically just think about, you know, it's all well and good to have a revolution, but you know, it's usually, you know. And there's the whole idea of destruction in the full creation because eventually ran to manifest and they decide to destroy it in the morning. And then, you know, I'm sort of ambiguous ending, as I say, you know. A tree never to bloom. In their minds, the revolution waited and waited like a seed to be planted, a tree never to bloom. So the ending lines, I'm trying to suggest that, well, it's ambiguous actually. Because on one level, that almost sounds like I'm affirming that they should take action, they should try and have a revolution. But on the other hand, I'm saying the obvious, I guess, in some ways. Anyway, that's that story. I don't know what else to say. But basically, sum it up by saying two stoners having a conversation about socialism in a sort of dystopian society. Paradox philosophy. So this. Story, but it's the final story, and we should round off the video. It's quite a sad story. It's basically about if you read it, you know, it's about a sad scientist, engineer of sorts, who misses his wife really, who sadly committed suicide, and basically that is the. I mean, I didn't know this when I started the collection, but that was the suicide of the title really, and I thought it was a good way to end the collection too, because I mean it's quite a sad ending in a way. Like, he's basically just this man who's trying to remember his wife as best he can and, you know, honour her, I guess. But yeah, and it's a depressing ending, actually, in a way. And he also has a dream as well when he, you know. But I mean, I'll wrap this up now. So, all the stories in that collection are rather grim in a way, but I wanted to explore the gothic and the sort of horror aspects more than the science fiction. I think I achieved that, so I'm happy enough. I think I need to sleep now. I'm very knackered, but I think that's been at least informative, if not. If not, okay. So, anyway, have a good one. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it. I'm going to sleep.